Martin King famously said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Smart man, he was right. And if you believe in the fundamental goodness of humans, not saying there's not some evil in all of us, but the fundamental goodness of humans, and you know he was right. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This month, we finally got justice with respect to one of the individuals and one of the companies that, in my opinion, helped cause the coronavirus. Now, let me explain what I mean. I'm talking about a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Daszak. We've all heard that name. The name of this company is EcoHealth. COVID, as we know, killed 20 million people across the world. It caused $25 trillion of damage across the planet Earth. Where did COVID come from? COVID, of course, coronavirus is the virus. That's why we call it the coronavirus. It had to come from one of two places. First, it could have occurred naturally. It started in a bat, we know. Our scientists tell us that. And then viruses, which are very aggressive and very interested in self-survival, the virus jumped from another animal into another animal, which was consumed by a human being. And that's how the coronavirus became a human virus. Occurs naturally, jumps from one animal to another. But there's another way the coronavirus could have happened. It could have been engineered. We know that the FBI, and we know that the Department of Energy, and we know that the CIA, and we know that Germany's top intelligence service all think that the coronavirus was engineered. What do I mean by engineering? Engineering a virus. That means they think that someone took that virus that came from a bat and genetically altered it so that it would expose humans to the disease that the bats would get. That's coronavirus, and that's what happened. And many of our intelligence agencies think that that's how the coronavirus started. And they think it started in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan, Canada, where the first folks who got ill first appeared. What does this have to do with Mr. Daszak, Dr. Daszak? The Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Chinese company, or the Chinese lab that was conducting this research on engineering the virus, was funded in part with American taxpayer dollars. It was funded in part by Dr. Peter Daszak and his company, EcoHealth. Dr. Daszak was good friends and professional colleagues with Dr. Tony Fauci and with Dr. Francis Collins. Dr. Collins ran the National Institutes of Health. Under him was Dr. Anthony Fauci, which ran the NIAID, dealing with infectious diseases. Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci gave Dr. Peter Daszak, who ran EcoHealth and is a British zoologist, millions of dollars in grants, taxpayer money. And Dr. Daszak took some of that money and he gave it to the Wuhan lab. And when he gave it to the Wuhan lab, the instructions to the Wuhan lab were to use the money to, quote, understand the risk of bat coronavirus emergence. What does that mean? The purpose of this project at the Wuhan lab, funded in part by American taxpayer dollars, was to take the bat virus, the virus in the bat, modify it, and make it 10,000 times more infectious for lab mice. And that's what they did. And many commentators and many news accounts say that what Dr. Daszak, with the money from American taxpayers that he got from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, what they were doing was conducting gain-of-function research. You've heard that term. Gain-of-function research just means taking, in this context, an animal virus, a bat virus, altering it genetically so it'll jump into a human. Pretty dangerous stuff. Now, Dr. Fauci has said that didn't happen. Dr. Collins says that didn't happen. And Dr. Daszak says that didn't happen. But everybody else says it did. The FBI says it did. The CIA says it did. The top spy agency in Germany says it did. The Department of Energy says it did. So what happened? What happened? Well, we do know that the first two people that we know of in the world who got the coronavirus, the first two humans, were not people in the city of Wuhan. They were workers in the Wuhan lab. Remember, coronavirus supposedly hit, January, February? These two people working in the lab got it in November. We also know that when the virus became really contagious, other than these two people who were working in the Wuhan lab, it became contagious in Wuhan, China, a few miles away from the Wuhan lab. It's pretty curious. We also know that when word first broke of the coronavirus, Dr. Fauci learned about it. You know who one of the first person he called was? Dr. Peter Daszak, and said, what's going on? We also know that Dr. Daszak was trying to convince the American people and the people of the world that the virus started naturally, and it didn't start from his gain-of-function research. We know that he rounded up a bunch of epidemiologists to write a fake article and start publishing it and others in a lot of professional scientific magazines to try to convince the world that the bat virus jumped to human beings naturally. We know that. That's all come out. We also know that after the coronavirus happened, that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, instead of taking money away from Dr. Daszak, gave him extra money. We're not sure why, but he did. Now, as a result of this, and let me say, you say, how did it escape the Wuhan lab? I just want to make this point. A molecular biologist at Rutgers University, Dr. Richard Ebright, he studied the Wuhan lab. He said that its safety standards were about the same level of a typical dentist's office. I mean, you would think if you're going to do this gain-of-function research, you do it in an environment so that once you take the bat virus and make it a human virus 10,000 times more contagious, you would try to keep it within the lab. Wuhan didn't do a very good job with that, we know now. Well, there were denials back and forth, so we meaning the Congress, asked the Department of Health and Human Services to study this, and they did, and they announced their decision this month. The Department of Health and Human Services has cut off all funding and formally debarred Dr. Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance, of which he was the former president for 5 years, based on evidence uncovered by a congressional committee. This is what the Department of Health and Human Services found, according to Professor Ebright, who's read the report. He says that, quote, EcoHealth Alliance provably defrauded the United States government, provably breached contractual terms of U.S. government grants, and through the reckless gain-of-function research it conducted in Wuhan, probably caused the COVID-19 pandemic, killing 20 million people and costing $25 trillion. Wow, that's what the professor said. The Department of Health and Human Services, in its official debarment letter of Dr. Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance, said that EcoHealth and Dr. Daszak routinely ignored government oversight requests, failed to report dangerous gain-of-function experiments conducted at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and produced a required research report 2 years late. It took a while, and some will call this only partial justice, but we now have justice. And at least for 5 years, and I hope forever, Dr. Peter Daszak and any company with which he is affiliated will no longer receive taxpayer dollars from the National Institutes of Health, because he was doing, according to many people smarter than me in many news reports, he was funding gain of research in Wuhan. And he also was given money by Dr. Fauci and by Dr. Collins to study viruses in Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian nations. Pretty scary stuff, and we know how it all turned out. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Dr. Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance received at least partial justice this month, thanks to President Trump's Department of Health and Human Services. And as one taxpayer, I am grateful.